The typical rehab approach for low back pain is to include some sort of core exercise with the emphasis on maintaining a neutral spine when performing these exercises. Some of the more common exercises are planks, side planks, and glute bridges. And generally there's typically not an issue with this approach. Sometimes temporarily avoiding provocative positions can be helpful to let everything kind of settle down, and then we can just resume our normal activities. But there are a couple scenarios where I think this approach falls short. The first scenario is with persistent low back pain. With that typical rehab approach always enforcing neutral spine, it can actually create some fear avoidance behaviors around extending the spine. Because all of those movements are focused primarily on just maintaining that neutral spine and never going into extension, then it can actually make us less tolerant of those positions. The way that I like to think about this is similar to how we think about learning a new language. If we're doing a lot of studying, then actually having some short breaks can be helpful in that learning process. But we don't want to take too long of a break because then we'll actually get a little bit rusty when we try to return back to learning the language. So when we're looking at extension for low back pain, for example, maybe we actually take a little bit of a short break to let the tissues calm down, but eventually we need to get back into exposing ourselves to that extension so that we can get better at it. The second scenario where I think the neutral spine rehab for low back pain falls short is with our athletes that are frequently loading into extension. So if we look at golf, tennis, baseball, gymnastics, all of them require the athletes to get into extension, typically quickly and with a lot of load. So when we're actually trying to get them back into sport, we want to make sure that they're able to tolerate extension. So that end stage of rehab needs to be able to expose them to that movement so they can also get better at it. So this exercise progression is going to start off with some lower load exercises to start exposing the spine to some extension. And then it's going to gradually increase the challenge on those movements so that we're increasing both the load as well as the speed of the movement. These first two exercises are low load exercises meant to just start exposing the spine to some extension. Generally we'll use them if somebody is really sensitive to extension, so it allows us to get into extension without much pain. Or if somebody is very fearful of these positions, it allows us to start getting into those extended positions without triggering that painful mechanism. The press up is the first exercise that we'll do. We actually use this exercise a lot with sciatica, but it can also be used if we have pain with extension. So we're gonna lay on our stomach, and the first thing we're gonna do is we're actually just gonna press up, so just like the name implies, but we're gonna start on our elbows here. And so we just wanna press up as high as we feel comfortable, keeping our pelvis on the ground. So when I'm in this position, I'm extending my lower back. And then we could just slowly come back down. And so obviously we can just vary how far we actually come up. If that's as far as we can go, that's fine. If we feel like we can get up higher, that's great as well. We can also progress this to get more extension by actually going up under our hands and then pressing up through here. So now we're up in that higher position, getting more extension through that lower back. So we can make this movement a little bit more dynamic by doing a cat camel. So we'll start in a quadruped position here, hands underneath shoulders, knees underneath hips. And then from this position here, we're gonna just arch our back up towards the ceiling. So we're actually going into flexion here. And then we're gonna reverse the movement. So we're gonna bring our stomach down towards the ground, and this will be getting us into extension. And so if we look up, generally we'll feel a little bit more extension in the lower back. So if we're really sensitive, we can still keep our head down towards the ground and then just slowly go in between those two movements. Again, because this is kind of just exploring the movement, we don't have to try to go towards the full end range at the beginning, but just try to do as much as we actually feel comfortable doing. Once we're able to tolerate just getting the low back into extension, then we can start to load it. And we can do this by modifying two common core exercises, both the dead bug as well as the bird dog exercise. The dead bug starts with us on the ground with our arms and legs up in the air. And so the first progression is to just flex the arms so that they touch the ground up overhead. Then we can progress to tapping heels on the ground. And then performing opposite. So we'll drop our leg and arm at the same time, and then opposite arm, opposite leg. And a popular cue that's used with this exercise is to actually push the spine down into the ground, and that actually brings us into a little bit more of a flexed position. So if we're just starting to load the spine, then that actually might be a cue that we'll use if our spine is particularly sensitive to an extended position. But we're trying to load the spine in a little bit more extension, so we can actually arch the back a little bit so that I can put my hands underneath my back here, and then we can actually repeat the same progression. So bringing those arms up, tapping heels, makes it a little bit more challenging. And then we could do opposite arm, opposite leg, all while maintaining that extended position so that we're loading the spine in a little bit more of extension. Another popular core exercise is the bird dog. And so to perform this, we're going to start in the same position that we did the cat camel in, which is a quadruped position. And the progression is actually the exact same as what we did for the dead bug. And so what we'll do is we'll start with just our arms here, flexing them up as high as we can go. And then for the legs, pushing our heel back behind us as far as we can go that way. Switching sides. And so one of the common cues that's used is not to actually extend the low back for bird dogs. But again, we're trying to actually extend and load the spine in extension. So we can actually be okay with dropping the belly again, getting that extension through here, and then activating the glute and the lumbar paraspinals here to expose that spine into a little bit more extension. And so again, we can do the opposites, just like what we did for the dead bug. We can go here and extend and lift up. If that's painful, then we can actually just push and try to get our hand as far away from our foot so we're not extending the spine quite as much, or we can lift up a little bit higher to get us into that extended position. And then we can start to really challenge the low back into some of those extended positions. So we can either do this by going to the end range of motion or by increasing the speed at which we're doing the movements, both of which will help to prepare us for returning back to sport. If we need to, because we're starting to challenge the spine a little bit more into those extended positions, we can use an exercise band initially. And so for all the exercises, you could take an exercise band around the wrist, pull so there's tension on the band, and then do whatever the exercise is. And the progression, if you're using the exercise band, is to actually use it less and less. That will engage less of the muscles so that way you're able to do it without any sort of feedback. So we know that as the hips extend, so does the lower back, so we can actually use that as the progression here to start exposing the spine to more extension. We can use an exercise band in the beginning just to kind of help reduce any pain that we might have as we start to load a little bit heavier. What we're going to do here is we're going to just pull the exercise band out and then maintain that pressure as we go from this position here up into a tall kneeling position. So what it'll look like is hands here, and then we're going to extend, bringing our hips into full extension if we can, and then slowly coming back down. If we need to, we can relax the arms, pull here, and then coming back up. If we want to further challenge in this position, we can do the same thing, but we can actually have our arms up overhead, which will get us into a little bit more extension here as we go up and then slowly back down. Again, keeping tension on the band. Ideally though, we actually don't need the exercise band, and that we're able to go from this position here up into that tall kneeling position and then back down. Again, if we need to, we can bring our arms up overhead just to give us a little bit more of a challenge while we do this. The next progression is to actually just do these standing. So we could just do a typical back extension, hands at our side, and just lean back, trying to extend through that lower back. And so here's from the side, just extending back as far as we feel comfortable. Again, we can put our hands up overhead just to increase the challenge on that lower back with the extension. If we want to progress through a larger range of motion, we can actually do a squat for the same reason that we did with the tall kneeling position. Is that as we squat down, we go into flexion. As we come up overhead, we'll go into extension. So we can actually challenge it a little bit more by sticking that stomach out a little bit, going into a little bit more extension, going down into that squat. And so now we're just kind of working through a little bit larger range of motion. If we're looking at returning to sport, then we can actually start to increase the speed of doing these. So we can go down and then up and just start working through some larger ranges of motion in a quicker fashion. And then to build off of this, when we look at returning back to sport, we're going to be extending through a variety of different positions. So if we look at baseball, for example, as we're throwing, we're going to have some rotation plus extension. Or if we're looking at tennis, as we toss the ball up for a serve, we're going to be rotated plus extended as we hit the ball. Or maybe we're playing football or frisbee or something like that, and as we're tracking something, we're looking back and we're rotated plus extended to try to catch the ball or the disc. So when we're returning back to sport, we want to make sure that we're able to tolerate these positions. So again, the nice simple way of just mobilizing any of these positions is actually just to do those same standing rotations, but then kind of do like a hula hoop or maybe like a hurricane, where we're actually working on extending through a variety of different positions, and we can add some rotation to the end ranges here, just getting used to it. And so we just want to make sure that before we start going back into sport, that our back is able to tolerate those positions, and that the first time we do it, isn't a quick, sudden movement when we're trying to react to something, but we've done it a lot in rehab so that we're prepared. So hopefully that exercise progression for low back pain with extension was helpful. If it was, go ahead and give this video a big thumbs up. If you want to see more of my content, hit the subscribe button right over here to the side, and you can also hit the bell icon to be notified of future videos. I'll see you guys in the next one.